Welcome to the American Pakistan Foundation's 2025 Heritage Week podcast on literature. This week coincides with Pakistan's Independence Day. It's also a week where we highlight and celebrate the amazing accomplishments and stories of Pakistanis in the diaspora. It also marks the 16th anniversary of the American Pakistan Foundation. Our episode for today is entitled Telling Our Stories. My name is Daniel Wakar, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of History at Tufts University. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Farah Habib. Farah Habib is a creative writer and professor of English at Bristol Community College in Fall River, Massachusetts. She's co-director of the America-Pakistan Foundation Education Exchange, a reciprocal cultural exchange program with Kinnaird College for Women in Lahore. The program's focus on women's empowerment across cultures and generations has provided a platform for women to see themselves as global citizens, capable of making significant impacts within their communities and beyond. Habib is a member of Sisterhood for Salam Shalom, where she helped create space for women to express their views, learn from each other, and build bridges across divides. As a published author, she uses her essays and short stories to explore the complexities of identity and belonging, particularly for Pakistani women. Her writing serves as a powerful medium for cultural understanding, education, and empathy, shedding light on the nuanced experiences of immigrant life from the perspective of Pakistani women. She was also one of APF's 2024 Rising Stars and was honored at APF's annual retreat in New York City in late May of this year. She has a bachelor's in journalism and master's in composition and rhetoric from the University of Rhode Island and an MFA from Bennington College in Vermont. Professor Habib, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle, for having me. It's a true pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure for us to have you. First, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your identity and background and connection to Pakistan. How did you become so interested in creative writing and literature?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I was born in Karachi, but at a very young age, we moved to the West. So early on, I became a visitor to my homeland because my father worked for the airlines and we had the perks of traveling a lot. But this instilled in me like the sense of being displaced, both in the West and the East, that sense of not belonging. And it was my father who recognized that it was the through the written word, it was to the written word that I was gravitating, and I was using it to express myself as I settled into our new surroundings. Because he had such trust in me, I pursued writing as a career, which I think was unusual for those days. And maybe even to a certain extent today, it wasn't really as a practical career for most Pakistani, and not something that most Pakistani parents were encouraging their children to do. But in any case, I wanted to do anything that had to do with writing. And so when it came time to choose a career, I chose journalism. And yeah, that's how I started to come towards writing and literature eventually.
Yeah, and you just mentioned in the past you were a journalist. I was wondering if you could share with our audience a bit about your work as a journalist. What did it mean to you to become a storyteller? What types of stories did you
Mhm.
cover? And what really drew you to this kind of path initially?
hmm So to start out, because I was a rookie reporter, I was covering local beats first in Little Old Rhode Island, where I went to school. And then I got a job in Gannett Newspapers, which is a subsidiary of the USA Today conglomerate. And I was assigned to cover the local beats in Westchester County, New York, and Putnam County. And at first, again, it was just your local beat. But then eventually I sort of found my way to a growing community in Westchester County of Pakistani Muslims. And this was pre 9/11, but it was right around the time when the first attack on the World Trade Center happened, the bombing in the basement. And Muslims were just realizing or just sort of developing a sense of, like, okay, we need to speak up, we need to be recognized as who we are. And the community that I landed with, they invited me to cover their town, their mosque, their events, and so I became sort of like a voice for the community, and that's how I think I really discovered the power of the inward, as they say, the power of the pen to influence people and get people to see the other side of a story. Um, so, it gave people a chance to be heard and allow others to see that, people are multi-dimensional, instead of people, having to be have represented as a single story.
So, in your time as a journalist, is there a particular story that sticks out, or interview that you were conducting, or article that you were writing, or type of media that really sticks out that you want to share with folks?
Well, the stories that I did were if we're talking about the stories with the Pakistani community, it was really just a sense of, there was this young man who was running for office. He was Pakistani American, and he really needed to have, to be seen and heard. And so I followed some of his campaign. I did a few stories about him. And I covered, I was probably one of the first reporters who actually went to Eid prayers, and I wrote a whole story about what it means to be a minority celebrating a holiday that isn't mainstream, and sort of showcasing the growing community. So I did some of those stories. But one story that really sticks out for me isn't about the Pakistani community, but this was something that I'm immensely proud of. So upstate New York is a watershed area, but it's also farm country. So not Westchester County, but the county just above that, which is Putnam County, has a large has many apple orchards, and migrant workers follow the crops from south to the north or west. They go from like South America to California, but they often make their way up to upstate New York because of the apple season. And so I actually embedded myself in these camps, and I was able to sort of follow this community on a day-to-day basis. And I wrote a whole feature length piece on this migrant community and what their lives are like, and what it means to be migrant workers. And yeah, it was recognized. My work was recognized for that, and I really enjoyed being in in their midst.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
What I imagine that kind of shaped your view of the diaspora, of what it means to belong or to be considered quote unquote foreign, in a land that's not your own, but that you reclaim as your own. So, maybe we can tuck that away, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. Um, as I mentioned in the introduction, you teach literature and composition at Bristol Community College. I was wondering if you could tell listeners not just about your work there, but your journey to kind of teaching English, and covering a different side of storytelling and story writing.
Okay, so yeah, so I my other degree is in English composition and rhetoric in particular, and then I also have a degree in creative writing. So as I said earlier, everything that I've done has had to do with writing, and that was what I demanded of myself. And so I found my way to teaching at a community college, which for me, I take immense pride in that. Um, as I'm talking to you, I'm finding this to be a thread, the fact that I covered a migrant community where, these were underrepresented voices that aren't being heard. I'm teaching at a community college where there are people who are misaligned, if you will, or there are certain assumptions. You often have to sort of defend the idea. But the reason I'm immensely proud is one, because my front and center for me is teaching over research. And so I can do that at a community college. And second, the students at a community college are so dedicated to what they want. They have overcome so many obstacles and hurdles and continue to do that as they make their way to the classroom. They're paying for their own education, but they're also facing a lot of, many times, trauma, abuse, insecurities at home, being caretakers at young age. They're also older people who are realizing their dreams for the first time, second chance at life. So I find inspiration from my students to keep doing the things I want to do because they're doing the things they want to do, despite all the things that can are there to stop them, you know. So you asked me like something about like teaching in the classroom. So when I'm teaching them, I teach literature, I teach freshman composition, and I teach often when the class runs, I teach contemporary American literature, which is 1945 onwards. So I try to focus on literature of marginalized voices, which is typically of that period anyway. And that has given me a chance to weave in Pakistani literature, Pakistani Anglophone literature, but not necessarily just Anglophone literature, some literature in translation as well. So that's another perk to be able to sort of bring in my different interest areas into my teaching.
That's really fantastic. As we're talking, I realized we have one similarity, which is both of at least one of our respective parents worked in the airline industry. My mom was an air hostess for
Oh,
for Pakistan International Airways in the 1980s.
oh
And
goodness.
when she married my father and both of them moved to the United States permanently, she had to get a completely fresh start. So any of the kind of educational qualifications that she had done in Pakistan were kind of rendered moot when she moved to the United States. And so my parents ended up settling in
Mm,
Las Vegas, Nevada. And my mom was looking for where she could get that fresh start, and she realized nursing, and this was the early to mid 90s. Um, just as I was growing up. And she realized, nursing would be an ideal path, but she would have to do a lot of work to get there. And spent a lot of time taking classes at the community college in Las Vegas, the Community College of Southern Nevada. Now it's just the
mhm.
College of Southern Nevada. But I grew up hearing these stories. My mom has a picture of me, as a little kid on her lap at her community college graduation.
Yeah.
And as I was going through, I also took classes at a community college, and so
Yeah.
that space, those instructors have a special place in my heart because they do a lot of great work, giving people fresh starts
Hmm.
for recent immigrants, for lots of other folks.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's really wonderful, and thank you for doing such great work there.
Thank you.
Um, I was wondering before we, move into the kind of broader space, I was wondering, you mentioned that teaching over research is kind of your priority. What is different? Could you share with our listeners, what is different about a community college space versus a university or a different kind of college? What makes the community college as an environment special, a special place to teach English or a special place to be or take classes?
Hmm. So, in addition to what I already said about the students being so unique, I would say um, I mean, this is not necessarily like the best part, but we are required by state to teach 5 courses, at least in Massachusetts, where I am based. Um, that is a lot of courses to be teaching. So that is different from a university or college, where often professors may have to teach up to three maximum, and often just two, because they need to have room and space to work on their research. Um, so that's a major difference. But there are ways to cut back the teaching load, which through what's called course reassigns or course releases, where you say, okay, I want to work on this. Would you consider giving me fewer courses so that I could do that? Or the administration has a project and then they give you time off from teaching. So I've taken advantage of those opportunities. Plus, like a four-year university, we actually do get sabbatical. So we can apply for sabbatical. We have tenure. Once you get tenure, you can apply for sabbatical. And I've taken advantage of my sabbatical opportunities as well, which have led me to a lot of the passion projects that I've been so blessed to be engaged with.
No, that's really fantastic.
Yeah.
And we'll unpack some of those projects in a little bit. But one thing I wanted to also ask about is if you could tell us a bit about the town that you teach in, Fall River, Massachusetts. Before this, we were talking about some of the assumptions folks have about Fall River as a sort of former mill town, as a town of with a particular history, as a port city attached to it. People have different conceptions about crime and violence and all these sorts of things. And I was wondering, could you tell us a bit about this town? What were some of your assumptions kind of going into it? And what were some ways that the town has served you or that you kind of learned from it or grown from it as you've
Mhm.
lived and taught there?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been at Bristol Community College for more than 2 decades now, and but I've lived in Massachusetts for longer. So actually, not just Massachusetts, but Massachusetts and Rhode Island, so New England for longer. And Fall River has always been like this community of a former mill town. So it used to be a mill town, a lot of mill cloth factories, fabric um, factories that got shut down. So it became a little rundown, and it had a reputation of lower socioeconomic status, high crime and whatnot. However, after working there, I have come to know it more intimately. And our college serves as a huge base. We have a really great theater program, so that brings a lot of people together for plays, um, you know, other performances. Um, we also have a children's museum here now, which also was started by my college, a faculty from my college. We're very close to New Bedford, which has a huge art scene, theater, and music. Fall River has gone through a huge makeover. There's beautiful waterfront, great places to walk now. I go walking there a lot. So yeah, it's changed a lot. So it's another example of, assumptions about people and places.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And that's wonderful that you're doing such great work there and that it's gone through its own story arc, as we've
Mm,
been discussing. So I really like that.
mm,
One other question that I had is in 2020, during a rise in hate crimes in the US, you put together a series at Bristol Community College entitled A More Perfect Union, Bristol Stands Against Hate, a colloquium on understanding. I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a bit more about this project and what you as well as the community learned from this.
mm. Yeah, thanks again for that question. So I got the idea for starting a colloquium in the aftermath of the Christchurch, New Zealand mosque bombing, which was in 2019. I think it was like the spring of 2019, where I think about 50 people were killed at the mosque. And it was traumatic and shocking to read about that. And especially because it was while people were worshiping, and I think it got me because it was an event that was happening in the world, but people around me weren't talking about it. And I wanted to bring attention to it as an example of hate crimes, not because I want, and also that something else that was happening at the time was this was the start of the polarization happening in the United States, where people were just like, not coming to one, like they were just sort of separated, like it was my way or the highway, and refusing to listen to each other. And I wanted to use this opportunity or this event as an opportunity to get people to talk about, like what is it that we want in this world? We all obviously let's look for common ground, peace, right? Everybody wants peace. Nobody inherently, no normal person inherently would want violence and destruction and killing. So I wanted to use that incident as a way to get conversation and dialogue going about what causes these kinds of things and what can we do to start to overcome such hatred and bias, prejudice and stereotypes. And so, with the help of my colleagues and thanks to the support of my college, I started this colloquium, which was called Bristol Stands Against Hate, a more perfect union, Bristol Stands Against Hate. Um, and it was a year-long series of experts coming to lecture at our college. We had film showings and engaged people in many different ways. And one of the persons we invited was a filmmaker, Aisha Sultan, who's a Pakistani American colonist at the St. Louis Dispatch. And she made this 10-minute film called Other People about stereotypes and prejudice. And we showed that film at my college and engaged people in a panel discussion. And it was well attended. And it really spurred a lot of dialogue, not just that event, but many events like that throughout the whole colloquium series. And I was immensely proud of the reception that the college and the local community gave to those events.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. And
Mm.
thank you so much for sharing the kind of short film example too. I think that
Mhm.
that really illustrates the kind of wide depth and breadth of it. I guess one question that I have on this note too is, what were your kind of students' reactions when they're attending these kinds of events? And how did they kind of perceive that and perceive themselves in the kind of like socioeconomic diversity in Fall River?
Good question. So you asked earlier about community colleges, right, and the difference. So one of the unique characteristics of community college students is that, well, it may not be so unique, but they're balancing a lot of things, students. They're working many hours and they're not, even though they may be full-time students, they have a multitude of responsibilities in addition to work, so family and other things. And so, because it's not a residential campus, many people just come to classes and off they go to do whatever they need to. Um, so whenever we offer such special events, the biggest challenge is, well, how do you get people to come? And this was pre-COVID. So post-COVID has become even more challenging. So, how do you get people to attend these events? So the thing that what's worked for us is sort of aligning the events with classes. So if most of our classes are being held, let's say between 9:30 and noon. Well, let's offer these events during those times. And so then faculty are sort of encouraged to bring their students or offer extra credit. So enticing them, sort of hanging the carrots. So that is what we did. We got shared a lot of publicity, and faculty brought their students. So once the students were sitting in the seats, many hadn't probably even heard of the Christchurch incident because it happened so far away, right? Everybody's in their bubbles, right? I don't even know how many students know Pakistan, right? But once they watched the film or attended that event, they started talking. We had surveys, and their responses were really amazing. They wanted more of these events. They wrote about these things in their essays. Many people use those to talk about examples of prejudice and stereotypes that were happening to them in their communities. So it was really good to see the the connections that they were making because of what they were listening to and hearing. So yeah, I really enjoyed that part.
That's really fantastic, and thank you so much for kind of sharing the threads that your students took away from that and how it
Mhm.
elicited their own sort of form of storytelling and
Mhm.
reflections on their own lives and their own place in the kind of tapestry of Fall River, the diversity of Massachusetts, and their kind of connection to English composition and storytelling.
Mhm.
One other program or piece of work that I want to highlight that you've done is you recently worked with the American Institute of Pakistan Studies to create the American-Pakistan Educational Exchange,
Mhm.
which brought several students and faculty in the humanities from Kinnaird College for Women in Lahore to the United States for a mutual exchange project. First, I was wondering, what was the impetus for working on this project? What was it like engaging in this project, and why did you carry it out? And what did you learn from it?
Yeah, so this project, APEX for short, right? America Pakistan Education Exchange, is I would consider it the highlight of my professional career, and maybe even personal life, because it brought together for me my identities, my identity as a Pakistani and my identity as an American, and also my identity as an academic. So it started really as any great project starts, not knowing that we would end up here, you know. I was engaged I was really just trying to survive during COVID, just like everybody else, and looking for ways to distract myself and getting immensely bored just cheat and not teaching online, and just sitting in my seat. And I wanted to do things to be inspired. And so I started connecting with people, and I discovered the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, and they're an organization that is affiliated with the Department of State. And so they connected me with folks who had done faculty exchanges um, with Pakistan, and they were looking to do more. So I met, people, and we came together, and we were given a grant to go to Pakistan in 2022 to do a professional development workshop at Foreman Christian College in Lahore. And through that workshop, I met some of the most talented women faculty from all different colleges in Lahore, and in particular, Kinnaird College for women. I met the wonderful Zubda Zia, who is a professor of economics at Kinnaird. And she and I, along with Paul Edelman at Sauk Valley Community College, who I met through AIPS, we started talking about doing study abroads or cultural exchanges. I was actually brought into the game a little later. The two of them were talking, and when I heard about it, I said, okay, I'm not missing out on this. And so the three of us started talking, and you really need really dedicated people to do this. And the two of them were doing some great work, and we then reached out to our respective schools and got the grants that we needed. AIPS in particular supported us, and we were able to take faculty first to Pakistan. And then we brought students and faculty from Kinnaird. These were 10-day visits. And then eventually we took our students to Pakistan. So some of our students had never been on a plane before. And they got on a plane and they went to Pakistan. So it was quite eye-opening for many people to go to a country, a developing country like Pakistan. They were blown away by the hospitality. They attended Kinnaird, which is female-oriented, women empowerment focused, and they brought back such stories to share. And I have a student who has since attended many conferences. He went to the Harvard conference. He's I think he's an American student, born American. He's from local Fall River community, and he has attended conferences having to do with Pakistan. He has been meeting with the president of my college to drum up support to continue the program, and he wants to stay focused on South Asia. So we might have started something with him there. I don't know. So it's really amazing to see the ripple effect of such programs. I have a student at Sauk Valley did a whole honors project on the partition because she went to attend. She visited the Cultural History Museum in Lahore. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's near the Minar-e-Pakistan. It's near there. So yeah, those are some examples of things that have come about that have made me really convinced that we need to find ways to continue the program.
Yeah, no, that's a really wonderful museum. I went on my last visit,
Mm.
and it's supported by the Citizens Archive of Pakistan.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And does a lot of really great work. I was wondering if we could dig a bit deeper into that because it's such a, massive shock for folks who have never been on a plane to go to Pakistan of all places. What was
Yes.
that experience like for the students there, for the faculty on this trip? What did they gain from these kind of intercultural exchanges with faculty, quote unquote, on the other side? And then what was it like for the students who came from Pakistan to the United States? Folks I imagine who maybe may not have traveled outside of Pakistan to like come to Bristol Valley or to Bristol Community College, and to kind of see this environment. What were these two kinds of exchanges like? Um,
Mm.
Take us a
Yeah.
little bit more into that.
So I wish, Danielle, I could share with you their testimonies. We've been recording videos with some of the faculty and students on both sides, and they've been great. But for the faculty who went there, we attended a conference when we were there, and we presented as keynote speakers, and we did workshops on different, focused on our areas of teaching and research. And they, we were received really well over there. People, have, we did workshops where we connected with the students and faculty. Um, One of the workshops that one of our faculty did was on Native American literature. And she talked about the importance of storytelling to Native American culture. And then connections were being made with the power of storytelling among Pakistanis and the Pakistani culture. And so the faculty who were attending this workshop shared their history and heritage with our American faculty. And she brings us back to her teaching here in the United States, um, and she wanted to know specific authors who she could read to perhaps integrate into her curricula. So that's an example. But it's not just at a professional level. These people have made lasting friendships. Pakistani hospitality being what it is, they came back laden with gifts, tokens of appreciation that are representative of our cultural, um, you know, of our culture, like shawls and marble work and paintings, rugs that were gifted. So these were just lasting friendships that people are continuing to sort of, work with.
That's
And
really
then as far as the students, yeah, let me tell you about the
oh yeah, yeah,
students.
yeah.
So the students, being younger, so they are very heavily involved with social media. They have connected and remain connected through social media. When they were together in both countries, they had worked on projects. So projects having to do with mental illness, how it's perceived and dealt with in Pakistan, how it's perceived and dealt with in the United States. They did projects on climate change. Um, and so that brought them close together. They visited cultural sites both here and in Pakistan together. So that allowed them to connect in that way. And they formed relationships. So that for them, they're still talking. So similar to faculty, they are now friends across the globe, which they couldn't say before. You know, I think many of our students and faculty were really impressed by the Kinnaird students. Many people weren't expecting that our students from Pakistan, women in particular, would be so well educated, would be as well spoken in the English language, and so polished. And they were blown away by the scholarship and the level of our students.
Yeah, that's really, really wonderful. I was watching
Mm.
in preparing for the interview, I was watching some of the testimonies that they gave, the female students who had come from Pakistan, about their experiences, and it was really mind-blowing. And this
Mm.
makes me think of there's two things that it makes me think of. One is the kind of like soft bigotry of low expectations, right? That people think that students from Pakistan speak bad English or they're
Mhm.
uneducated or backwards in so many different ways. But really, there is the depth of the human experience. Once you can kind of see it and experience it in a tangible way. But as the second thing that it makes me think of is as kind of borders harden in both very tangible but also very abstract ways around us, not just in the United States, but in Pakistan, around the world, the power of storytelling and the human
Mhm.
experience to overcome those, or at least to attempt to kind of eclipse those or the hardening of those borders and those lines and divisions being drawn. So I really applaud the work that you're doing there. I think it's really, really wonderful and fantastic.
Thank you.
Um, and I hope the project continues. And
I
I
hope so too.
the support that it needs from,
Yeah.
respective colleges and universities, the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, and so on, because these kinds of experiences and memories are priceless,
Yes.
and people really remember them forever. Um, so one other question that I had is earlier this year you gave a lecture at Kinnaird College on the American writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin. I was wondering if you could share a bit about the lecture and why you decided to give it and what the kind of reaction was from the audience.
Okay. So yeah, so the African American history literature is close to my heart, and I really appreciate its literary tradition for the way in which it captures the history of the of Blacks. And my one of my favorite stories, all-time favorite stories, is James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues, and I always teach it because it's a story of two brothers living in Harlem, New York, during the Harlem Renaissance. So the Harlem Renaissance was a time period in the 20s and 30s that was the height of the growing literary tradition of to celebrate talent, the writings of Black people. The jazz music was at its height. And so this story takes place during that time. And one brother is sort of resisting that, and he becomes a teacher. And the other brother is sort of succumbs to, I don't want to use the word succumbs, but he is attracted to that culture of music that is so alive and vibrant in Harlem. But along with, if you're a musician, one of your major muses is drugs. So his younger brother, the teacher's younger brother, his name is Sonny, gets caught up in drugs. And so it's sort of like a struggle between the two brothers, the older brother trying to figure out how to be an older brother. And there's a lot in there about how to choose a career and what it means to be successful, who's really escaping their environment. How do you escape your environment, by being different or by sort of embracing your people? So those kinds of questions really got me are the reasons why I love the story. And of course, James Baldwin's writing is so lyrical and such imagery in it that I think everybody should read his work. And my students respond well to this story. So I wanted to sort of share this love for this story with the students in Pakistan when I was invited there for the latest conference at Kinnaird to present a lecture to the English department. I went through the history of African American history, and I talked about James Baldwin, because I sort of consider his work as protest literature. So that being literature that's a way to get people to uh, incite people, I guess, to think about their condition and their situation. And James Baldwin was somebody who never felt like he belonged. He was, for obvious reasons, he was Black, first of all, and this was pre-civil rights that he was coming into his own, and segregation was the main reason why he didn't belong, but also because he was a homosexual. So United States was not very nice to homosexuals at that time, and so he chose to leave the United States and move to Europe. And there he felt most at home. So this idea of not belonging is really, and struggling to belong, is a thread in his work. And so he uses his writing to get people to see the ills of society. And so at the end of my lecture, I spoke to the group. This was a group of both faculty and students about examples they could find of protest literature in the Pakistani tradition. And that got us into a conversation that led to discussions about, Saadat Hasan Manto, who is my favorite Pakistani writer. And I guess that's kind of cliche because he's probably the favorite of many people, but I'll say it nonetheless. And so I really enjoyed the connections that were being made and gave me ideas for when I'm teaching back home, how I can integrate, comparative literature almost into my teaching with Pakistani literature, protest literature, and American protest literature. So yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. It was I was born in Pakistan. As a child, I was there only as most children are, being with family and having fun, associating Pakistan with, grandmotherly love. But then I just when I did this project for the first time, I returned as a professional. And it was a dream of mine to sort of be a teacher in Pakistan, and I got a little slice of that through that lecture.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
I think one question that I had here, as I'm listening to you kind of recount the arc of this lecture and the response, is, how did the audience, and how did you think through what it means to write protest literature, to engage in this? This is something that is really kind of close to my heart, as well as my research interests. And so I was wondering if you could kind of think about that, and how did the audience begin to approach what it meant to write about protest or to think about it across different time periods, different spaces. You're
Mhm.
talking about, James Baldwin's time in the pre and during the civil rights era in the United States in the 50s and 60s. Um, but as well, and Munto was writing perhaps a little bit earlier,
Mhm.
in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But I'm wondering, how did you think about protest literature? How did you approach it, and how did the audience kind of think about this as well?
Mhm. So, like I said, protest literature to me, I was sort of thinking about not just civil rights, but about just the sense of belonging, like using, like, I guess protesting in a silent way, using your stories to go against the grain, if you will. Um, so, for example, Toni Morrison in Beloved tells the story of the slave who decides to not only kill herself but her child, as a protest. She would rather have her child die than be subjected to slavery. And that story is just so beautiful and it's a classic, right? So those examples, so that's an example of protest literature, the ways in which people speak up. And then we have in Sadat Hasat Manto, one of my favorite stories. In Urdu, it's koldo, but in English, it's open it, right? And the way in which it protests the the abuse of women during the partition in a silent way by telling you about the suffering, the silent ways in which women were suffering during those years. I mean, that story is every time, even as I'm speaking now, as I think about that story, I shiver and I tremble at the subtle ways in the way it bites you, the horror of those days. So that's protest. It's protesting. Here people were in the partition saying we're fighting for our freedom. It's a great thing, but at the same time, look at what it was doing to its citizens, you know?
Yeah, I really feel that, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think there's a certain timeless quality to a lot of these writers, to James Baldwin, to Toni Morrison, as you mentioned, but also to Munto, right? He was writing these bitter truths that others didn't want to hear, perhaps maybe he didn't want to hear to a certain
Mm.
extent, and that partition affected the lives of folks around him, and it affected himself so much. And so Munto writes so beautifully in Urdu, and even when it's translated to English, some of the resonances are still there, these deep, bitter truths about what partition does, what violent nationalism does, how exclusionary it is, how it inscribes its legacy on the bodies of women in so many violent and misogynistic ways. And so, this kind of is a good segue into our next question on the kind of Pakistani literature and its renaissance in recent years, but the really long legacy of it, especially before 1947. And so, a lot of folks think that it's made this renaissance in recent years, especially in English, with works that have become very prominent by authors such as Camilla Shamsi, Muhammad Hanif, and Mohsin Hamid, who have all reached international acclaim. But I think for several decades, and dating back to 1947 or even before, with authors from the progressive writers movement and such, female Pakistani writers have been making a splash, from Bapsi Sidla's book, The Ice Candy Man, to Sahra Suleri's book, Meatless Days, both of which cover, I think, in some ways, the early years of the post-independence period, and not to mention countless others writing in Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, and other sorts of vernacular languages. I was wondering if you could tell us about your one or two of your favorite authors or works, and what are some authors folks may not know who they should?
Okay, thank you for that question. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of the great authors, Kamala Shamsi, Bapsi Sidhwa, Mohsin Hamid. These are the iconic Pakistani authors that everybody should read, especially if they want to start getting familiar with the talent that our tradition offers. Um, so yeah, but in addition to that, there are many other authors that are worth reading. So I'm going to start by mentioning some poets because Urdu is so rich in its language and uh, in its poetics, right? So one of my favorite authors is Shadab Hashmi, Zist Hashmi, out of San Diego, California. She has several collections of poetry, and she recently came out with a memoir. She was born in KPK and has since became an immigrant to the U.S. She has raised a family there, but her poetry books, Baker of Tarifa, Coal and Chalk. These are inspired by Islamic history and culture, and a lot of her poetry harkens back to the Moors of Spain and Arabic culture, but she also weaves in Pakistan and its history. So her poetry, I really enjoy it. I would recommend that to people. And then there's also Fatima Asghar, who's a younger poet. If They Come for Us, especially for younger folks. This is a great poet. It's interesting because she actually, if you're, yeah, if you're somebody who doesn't know too much about the partition, but love poetry, she would be a great one to read, because she's a young person, and talking about partition through her poetry. And I think she became an orphan at a young age. She's American, of Pakistani descent and maybe Indian descent too. Um, and so I would recommend her poetry. I think she even did a TV show at one time. So she has roots in Pakistan and Kashmir. So you can see that why she would have great stories to tell. And then there's a short story collection. And I actually share this with my American colleagues here because they know me as somebody who's always talking about Pakistan. So they always wonder, well, I want to have some and be introduced to this. Tell me what I can read as a quick primer. So I share with them this short story collection called Neither Night Nor Day, edited by Rakshanda Jalil. And it's 13 stories by women writers from Pakistan. And so they're short stories, great collection to sort of, peruse and maybe pick one or two to make your favorite, or if you're teaching them, those would be great to collect from those. And finally, there's a new memoir that's just come out by Samina Najmi, who's from Karachi, but is a professor in Fresno, California. I know her personally, but her memoir, Sing Me a Circle, Love, Loss, and a Home in Time, is about motherhood and being an immigrant, and it's about raising family here. So these are some contemporary um, authors, writers, and poets that are worth checking out.
This was such a lovely kind of list of recommendations. Thank you so much. And I picked up a few as well, so I'm going to dig through these and I'm excited to kind of look at them and we can link them for folks who are interested in kind of getting them and learning more about the rich canon of Pakistani writing, Pakistani American writing. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, you're welcome.
Kind of on that note too, you as we were talking about in the intro, you recently finished your Master's of Fine Arts degree in creative nonfiction from Bennington College in Vermont. And there you wrote a manuscript about the struggles of living in liminal spaces that immigrants and those in the diaspora deal with. This makes me think too of something that we were talking about earlier, the kind of storytelling and the writing that you were doing about the farm workers in Putnam County, the ones who were working on the orchards and the farms in upstate New York. I mean, those seem to be kind of liminal spaces where they are not as appreciated or they're perhaps forgotten by the farm owners, the American immigration system, so on and so forth. And so this seems to me as like one of the kind of connective threads of your work, not
Mhm.
just as a teacher of English, but as a scholar of storytelling, right? Of the struggles of living in liminal spaces across so many different registers. And so I'm wondering if you could tell our listeners more about your work developing this manuscript of what made this story so meaningful for you?
Thank you. So I can say with certainty that I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, right? But I feel that doesn't capture the whole of me because, I grew up in the Middle East. I attended elementary school in London. And then middle school in the United States, Texas, which might as well be a country of its own. And then I went to college in New England, the East Coast, right? So I was from the Southern culture to the Eastern culture. So, and then add to this the fact that my name can also be sort of, you can say Farah or you can say Farah. So you can sort of transition from being American to being Eastern, right? So all of that, and then also my education was both in public schools, but also private schools that were very Catholic oriented. So I was born a Muslim. I am a practicing Muslim, but the basis of my education, I went to, Catholic schools as a child, and even I graduated high school from a Catholic school. So even when you think about religiously, I know a lot about the Catholic tradition. And I have very good friends who are both Catholic and Jewish, right? So I feel like I sort of traverse cultures all the time, never really feeling like I belong to one in particular, which is your immigrant story, if you will, right? So all of those reasons have propelled me to remain in this liminal space. The borders of everything, borders of geographical borders, spiritual borders, even because we always question our faith, right? And also cultural borders. Having gone to college here, I was subjected to um, I was introduced to, exposed to the vices of American college culture, just like anybody else, right? So I've had to navigate all of that. So my out was writing. So to me, that's what inspired me to start to write. When I became a parent, it was gl- obviously clear to me, glaringly clear for me that not only was I struggling with it, but through the way I was parenting, my children were also struggling. I wasn't the devout Muslim who was a hijabi going to the mosque all the time and never letting my children be with people who were not Pakistani or people who were not Muslim. I welcomed, white American children into my family, into my house. I wanted my children to be exposed to all different cultures. So that put my children in, okay, well, now I've got to decide who I am, right, and what I'm doing. So I wanted them to think on their own, basically. So it was never a rigid form of being who they were. So I think all of those experiences I had to make sense of, like anybody has to try to figure things out. But for me, it was through writing. And so when my children all were in college and I was able to go back and work on my manuscript through my MFA. And so now I have a collection of essays that capture, my experiences as a Pakistani in England, as a Pakistani in Pakistan, as a parent in the US, being arranged into marriage, so all of those conflicting ideas that that one has to deal with in their lives, the many lives we live, sort of converged on the page for me.
I really enjoyed hearing that. And one thing that kind of spoke to me among all the different aspects that you were bringing out, is your turn to writing as you were becoming a parent and kind of raising your children. This makes me think of a book that I've been reading and enjoying lately, Becoming Baba by Ayman Ismail, who's a
Mm,
writer for an essayist for Slate and is talking about his kind of search for identity as an Egyptian American and as a Muslim growing up in suburban New York, in northern New Jersey after, like, during and after 9/11, and kind of raising children now and what it means to be Muslim and to be brown, in the kind of way that he is, in the race and questions about race and politics, and the everyday moment that we're in. So I think this speaks to many different audiences and many different folks, who may be viewing us right now too, about their struggles and search for identity as well. So I'm looking forward to reading it once you're comfortable with sharing it with folks,
mm.
and once it goes public. I know you've given us so many different books to recommend to our audience. So I'll modify this question slightly. Is there any sort of text or work of art, or song or film, or some kind of piece of art just generally that you'd recommend to our audience? And if you could share a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I might disappoint you in this, but I'm just going to go back to talking about Manto. I feel like he is, for me, a great example of a writer who everybody should read, and he's a classic. His stories are about broken families, about gangs, it's about prostitutes, rape victims, but they're also about anger, right? But he does it all through satire and humor, which makes it a good read. I mean, they're kind of deep and sometimes sad, but often sad, really. But I think revolutionary thought is desperately needed right now in Pakistan, but maybe all over the world. Um, and there is so much injustice, and he spoke to injustice. He wanted to get people woke, and we really need that. And I'll say we really need that in Pakistan, and I would love for people to sort of return to our roots in that way.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think, as we've been discussing, Urdu has such a rich heritage and tradition of storytelling, both in spoken, oral, as well as written forms. And Manto was so forward-thinking,
Mm,
in his ways and used, as you discussed, satire and wit, and creativity to reveal the kind of injustices of his time,
mm,
whether it was misogyny or nationalism or the brutality of, religious exclusion, all these sorts of things he revealed so well, and it speaks to not just, the fervor that the power that and pain that he was feeling at that moment, but it feels so ever present too in our current discourse. So
mm.
thank you so much for sharing that,
Yeah.
and thank you so much for such a wide-ranging conversation on the arc of your life, the arc of storytelling, your appreciation for teaching English language, literature, composition, rhetoric, and your kind of journey in search for identity. I think it fits really well into kind of how we tell our stories and how the future storytellers among us will kind of search for their stories. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciated this opportunity for this discussion.
Of course, take care.
Yeah.